Hi students, welcome back to the session on linguistics. Today we will have a discussion on the topic dialects. In spite of the existence of standard varieties of languages, there are variations in the use of language among people who belong to different communities. So, what do you mean by a dialect? A dialect is a variety of a language spoken by a community of speakers. So, a variety of language that is spoken by a group of people in a particular geographical region is known as a regional dialect. Okay? And such variations in the use of language exist based on many parameters. For example, in a society, there are different strata of people: the upper class, the middle class, the upper middle class, lower middle class, and finally the lower class, right? So, class distinctions exist in every society. So, a person who belongs to the aristocrat group will use a language in a particular refined way, whereas the person who belongs to the lower strata of a society would use the same language in a rather less polished way. So the best example is the English spoken by the aristocrats of London and the Cockney English spoken by the people in the lower class of the society. So such variations in the use of a single language based on the class to which the speaker belongs, we call them class dialects. Similarly, there exists something else called caste dialects. All of us are aware of the existence of caste system. It was prevalent in our society in olden days and it is still prevalent to a certain extent, though not explicitly stated. And based on the caste of a person, the language used may vary. For example, we have Nasrani dialect, Mapila dialect or Nambudiri dialect. So it all depends upon the caste of a speaker. So as I told you, a dialect means a variety of a language as used by a community of people. The variety of a language used by a community of people who live in a particular geographical region is called a regional dialect. And we do have class dialects and caste dialects. There is yet another word for this. A general term for class dialect, caste dialect and all is social dialect or sociolect. In general, we can use the word sociolect to refer to such variations in a language based on class, caste and so on. And coming to another word, idiolect. Idiolect means the individual's variety of language. No two speakers use a language in the same way. I may use a language according to my convenience and knowledge and my fund of experience, and you may use the language according to your set of vocabulary and your experience and preferences. So, no two speakers will use a language alike. So every individual has his or her own variety or unique way of using a language. So the individual's variety of a language is called idiolect. Hope it's clear to you. And we are moving on to another terminology, that is register. Register. What does that mean? Register is yet another variety of a language or another way of using a language in a very special way. Like people who belong to a particular profession may use chosen vocabulary, a specific set of vocabulary and preferred syntactic structures pertaining to their profession. So ordinary men may not be familiar with those usages. For example, we have medical register. legal register, journalistic register. So this is frequently used among people who belong to a particular profession and they can easily understand that. It may not be always comprehensible for an ordinary man. So a register is a specified use of a language which fall under a limited realm. Okay, so this is what you mean by a register. And if you are trying to represent all these varieties of languages on a map, you can represent it physically on a map by drawing lines and showing the demarcations between places which differ from each other with respect to the use of language. And the lines that you draw on such a map to make the distinctions between places according to the languages used in those places, we call all those lines isoglosses. All those lines on a map which are drawn to demarcate places which use different varieties of language, we call such lines isoglosses. So when you try to represent all such varieties of languages using many such lines, several isoglosses may be drawn on the map and they may crisscross and overlap. So at certain points on the map, there will be a crowded kind of line. So these areas can be called the dialectal boundaries. These areas are kind of bundles of isoglosses which help us to identify the boundaries of dialect within which one particular dialect is spoken. We can conclude that within that boundary, one particular predominant dialect exists. I hope it's clear to you. The lines drawn on a map to represent the distinctions between the language uses of different places, we call them isoglosses. And the points on such a map where so many isoglosses merge together can be said to be the dialectal boundaries. Is that clear to you? Okay. Now we will move on to another concept, that is, how do you identify whether it's a dialect or what? When you listen to a variety of a language, how do you understand that it's a dialect of a particular language? There is something called mutual intelligibility. There is something called mutual intelligibility, which means the one who speaks the language should be comprehensible for the listener. Whoever listens to that person should understand what the speaker is saying. Okay, so there should be an understanding between the speaker and the listener. Only then we can say that there is mutual intelligibility. So if this happens, then we can say that it's a dialect. We can label it as a dialect. Two speakers who knows a standard variety of a language can understand the dialectal varieties. So this is what you mean by mutual intelligibility. Now I'm moving on to another concept. It is titled diglossia. 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 It means in a community itself, two varieties of the same language may be prevalent throughout the speech community. Okay? One may be the literary variety, the formal variety used only in formal contexts, and the other one may be a common variety which is mostly used in the spoken form only, which is less formal. So we call it high variety and low variety, or capital H variety, capital L variety. I hope this is clear to you. These two varieties of the same language would exist with equal status, or it will coexist in a single speech community. This phenomenon is called diglossia. And now I am moving on to two other important concepts: Pidgin and Creole. Pidgin spelling Pidgin. Creole spelling Creole. So imagine that you got a job in a mine. Okay, Imagine that it is in a Gulf country, and the only language that you know is your mother tongue, that is Malayalam. And when you work there, you may have to communicate with a lot many other workers who have come from different parts of the world. So it is a context where none of the laborers share a common language. So in such a situation, all these migrant laborers will have to develop some sort of a language to communicate with each other. Only then their work can proceed in a smooth fashion, right? So they will develop a language, a contact language, or kind of a trade language, or a temporary language, with a very narrow function of basic communication. So such a language may imbibe elements from all the other languages. So the characteristic feature of such a language is, one predominant feature is that it has a very limited vocabulary, and it does not have a fully developed grammar, and it has a very narrow function to perform. So such a language which generates among people who do not share a common language is called a pidgin. And when the next generation of the pidgin speakers, like the children of those who speak pidgin, when they happen to hear this pidgin language frequently, what happens is they naturally imbibe it, they acquire it, and in course of time a pidgin language develops its vocabulary and its grammar becomes rather consistent, and it is put into use in more frequent ways. So the gradual but steady development of a pidgin to the status of a mother tongue is called a Creole. Is that clear to you? A pidgin and a Creole. Then we are moving on to next concept, that is bilingualism and multilingualism. It's very easy. Bi means two, bilingualism, or a bilingual person. Anybody who's able to speak and understand two languages is a bilingual person. And anybody who's able to handle, to understand, who is able to speak and understand, to read and write and comprehend many languages is a multilingual person. See, the world has developed a lot, and we live in an era of globalization and cultural openness. So everybody is connected with every other person, right? We live in a world of interconnectedness. So multilingualism is boosted up by this phenomenon itself. People who are able to speak, to use more than two languages are multilinguals. Okay, and as a result, in their conversations, they may switch from one language to another. So we have two terms, code switching and code mixing. Code switching and code mixing. When a speaker who knows two or even more than two languages may code switch while he is engaged in a single conversation. That means he may use a linguistic variety, alternate between two or more linguistic varieties when he is engaged in a single conversation. So this is what you mean by code switching. And code mixing is, for example, while you are speaking Malayalam, so many English words are interspersed within a conversation. Or while you are speaking Malayalam, so many Hindi words may come within. So this is an example of code mixing in Indian social context. So as a result of bilingualism or multilingualism, a speaker may code switch or code mix. Is that clear to you? So a bilingual person or bilingualism refers to the use of two languages by an individual speaker or by a community of speakers. Multilingualism refers to the use of two or more than two languages by an individual speaker or by a community of speakers. And I should mention slang as well. So the best example when I teach slang is that of Suraj. Hope you are familiar with that actor. So he was popular in the movie industry just because of the slang that he used to perform, right? So slang is something which is very informal. It's a variety of language. It's a type of language which contains certain words and phrases which are typically used by a group of people who belong to a particular region alone. It is highly informal and it's mostly used in the spoken form only. So Trivandrum slang, Thrissur slang, Kottayam slang, we all are familiar with that, right? Yeah. So that is what I mean by a slang. So when you learn language, when you learn about languages, you should know that there is of course a standard variety of a language, a literary variety or a formal variety which is used in very serious and formal contexts. But there exists a lot many variations to languages. A lot many variations may be there. Variations may be based on region, class, caste, based on individual preferences, based on profession, based on education, and plenty of other parameters. Okay, so we learn what dialects are, we learn what sociolect is, under which comes class dialect and caste dialect. Then we discussed isoglosses, dialectal boundaries, mutual intelligibility, what is a pidgin, what is a creole, what it means by the phenomenon of diglossia, what is bilingualism, multilingualism, code switching and code mixing, slang, and so on. I hope the session was clear to you. You have to refer your textbook and underline all the key words and make short notes for yourself. Thank you.